Welcome back. The Commerce Department adding over 50 Chinese companies to its export blacklist for helping to develop advanced AI supercomputers and chips for military purposes. Joining me now is the Gatestone Institute Senior Fellow. He is the author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. Gordon Chang back with me. Gordon, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. What do you see as the impact of adding these Chinese companies to the export blacklist?
Well, it's a good move because it shows that the Trump administration is taking this AI issue seriously. Yeah. But we got to remember that we keep on adding Chinese companies to the blacklist, the entity list of the Commerce Department. But the point is that China just uses then other companies to accomplish what it wants, which is to gather up U.S. chips or U.S. technology. We've got to understand that all Chinese companies are a threat. Remember, Xi Jinping has this doctrine of military-civil fusion. The Communist Party itself believes that no entity, no person in China can disobey a Communist Party order. So we just should understand the fundamental nature of the Chinese system and put every Chinese party on the entity list.
So what would be the most important move for the administration in facing off this threat? We've talked a lot about the Chinese stocks traded on U.S. exchanges. Would they go that far to remove those stocks from U.S. exchanges to stop the American public from investing in companies that may be working against the United States?
Well, the Trump administration should do that, and as you pointed out in your documentaries, Underwriting the Enemy, we are funding China's assault on our society. We're doing that with trade, of course, but we're also doing it with investment, and we're allowing Chinese companies to list. Right now, we have this boom in the Chinese stock market, which is bouncing off a very low bottom. But nonetheless, Wall Street loves it, and they're trying to sell China to the American public again. As Roger Robbins has said, we're funding our own demise, and this has got to stop.
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary. We see it so clearly, and yet that is a very significant lever to push for the administration. So we're watching that. Meanwhile, Hong Kong-based company C.K. Hutchison planning to sell the 43 ports, including 2 near the Panama Canal, to a BlackRock-led U.S. investment group. This $23 billion deal moving forward despite anger, apparently, from Beijing and from Xi Jinping. The Trump administration is seeking to regain control of the canal and curb Chinese influence in South America. CIA Director John Ratcliffe testified about it yesterday. Listen to this.
Director Ratcliffe, China's influence on the Panama Canal has increased since 2017. Panama became the first Latin American country to sign on to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Can you talk about not just China embedding itself into the various canal-related sectors and operations, but what other areas in Central and South America have China and others increased their presence?
The PRC throughout Central and South America continues to attempt to use its soft power to gain a foothold. They use direct aid to countries that need it. They also provide funding to universities to get a foothold to create influence. You've seen the diplomatic efforts of the administration to address that and push back on PRC ownership of the canal locks. But that ties into what the IC is doing.
Gordon, this is a very well methodical plan by China to intercept very important shipping lanes. Your reaction to all of this?
Well, the interesting thing is that Beijing is now throwing a fit. Yesterday was the 3rd time that the central government's 2 main offices in Hong Kong reposted an article from Dao Gongbao, the major pro-Chinese newspaper in Hong Kong. Those articles actually criticized Hutchison for selling the ports to BlackRock, and it did so in very corrosive terms, saying that any company that undermined China's national security was destroying its own foundations. And yet, Hutchison is going forward with this sale, which suggests that companies in Hong Kong are defying the Beijing central government, which is just inconceivable, or at least it would have been inconceivable a year ago. So I don't know what's going on here, but the point is that companies in Hong Kong are now starting to see that China is not as important to them as they once were. Otherwise, Hutchison would obey Beijing and would not be selling these 2 ports to BlackRock.
Well, this sounds like a good development. I mean, Li Ka-shing, the head of C.K. Hutchison, you would think would bow to Xi Jinping. He's not.
No, he's not. Interesting thing is that one of Li Ka-shing's sons, Richard Li, has been summoned to Beijing to go to the China Development Forum. And Beijing is going to put a lot of pressure on him there. And yet we're going to see how this works out. But Richard Li is not somebody who is going to say no to Beijing. But if he does, that signals a very important shift in the way that businesses around the world are starting to look at China.
Yeah, I met Li Ka-shing when I went to Hong Kong many, many years ago, and he certainly was a major leader then. He remains with that leadership position in Hong Kong. I think it's just extraordinary that you have this kind of resistance coming out of Hong Kong after they, swept in there and threw all the freedom fighters in jail, including Jimmy Lai a couple of years ago. So we'll keep a focus on that, Gordon. That's a very important point that you make. You have an op-ed in The Hill about how President Trump may be pushing South Africa closer to China, though, and that it might not matter in the long run. Tell us why.
Well, first of all, South Africa is already in China's camp. Second of all, China is at high tide in Africa. We're seeing this with its signature Belt and Road projects are failing, and Beijing is not stepping up to put more money in them. And we're also seeing countries in Africa start to look at China in a very different light because China's commitments to them have not been fulfilled over the last couple of years. Also, the other thing is that countries in Africa need the United States. They're looking for alternatives to China. And we're seeing countries spend a lot more time talking to New Delhi and Washington. So even South Africa, which is a very pro-China country, is now wanting a trade deal with President Trump. And we see President Ramaphosa is actually trying to tamp down anti-American sentiment in South Africa. So that's a very good development. And here again, you see China's great friends are now starting to abandon Beijing, something that we would not have thought of a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and that's, of course, the strategy of the CCP to get into Africa and start taking over to control those minerals, rich in minerals, as well as stop it from relationships with the U.S. Great reporting, Gordon. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.